So if we look at the qualities of subject versus object, we've actually spoken about some qualities of objects, and we've also spoken about, we've sort of implied, we've talked about implicitly some qualities of the subject, if I can call them qualities. Can anyone give me some qualities of the objects versus the subject?
Infinite, finite.
Infinite and finite, yes. What does that mean? What does infinite mean, and what does finite mean?
Infinite is always.
Always, okay.
Always.
Always, okay.
And finite comes and goes.
Finite comes and goes, okay. So what you've there done is you've described infinite in terms of time. Okay, you've actually described infinite in terms of time. Infinite time means always. Yeah. And something that's there for a finite time comes for a certain amount of time, then goes after a certain amount of time. It may appear for 1 second, or it may appear for a century, or it may appear for a millennia, or an even greater amount of time, but it appears for a finite amount of time. So you've described infinity in terms of time. Do you see that? Very good. So we could say that the subject is always present, whereas objects come and go. Yeah. And that's what you say. You said infinite and finite, but that's actually what you meant by that, I suggest. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. Any other qualities of the subject and object? It's good to be very particular about it. You know, I haven't been a bit picky here.
I agree.
Because if you get it, it helps the mind understand and not get lost, which is important for many, not for everyone, but it can be very important. If you're very ripe, if you're very ready for these teachings, you don't need all this stuff. But I certainly needed it. And most people will need this kind of precision in their thinking. Any other characteristics of the subject versus the object? What about some people who haven't spoken? Or people who have spoken?
What about, so if the subject is beingness,
Yes.
then what's the opposite of that?
That's a great question. What's the opposite of beingness? Sarah?
That's what I'm asking you.
I know. Being as opposed to?
Qualityness.
Okay. So Gordon's actually thinking about beingness as meaning devoid of qualities. And objects have qualities. The subject is devoid of qualities, actually. We're describing the qualities of the subject. But the subject is actually devoid of qualities. All qualities or characteristics belong to objects. So shape, size, smell, color, pleasurable, painful. All qualities belong to objects. The subject doesn't have any of these describable qualities, strictly speaking. And Gordon interprets the word beingness, I think, to imply no qualities, and then objects therefore have qualities. Okay. Beingness has different meanings, but being can mean, traditionally, beingness is a translation of Sat means that which is real. Sat means reality. Asat means illusion or not real. Sat means real, and asat means not real. So, and traditionally, that which is real never changes. So that which never changes is the self. And that which changes is the non-self. But in English, beingness is as opposed to doing. So being and doing. So doing means what, Sarah? And being means what?
Doing would imply that you're taking some action.
Doing means action. It does. What's the Sanskrit word for action?
Karma.
Karma. Yes.
And then being would be stillness.
Stillness. Exactly.
Mauna.
Mauna means silence. Yeah.
Ah.
So the self is described as, or the subject is described as mauna. And the Maya is karma. Yeah. Karma means action. Being means, in this context, it means stillness, as opposed to doing, which means movement. Movement. Anything that moves is Maya. Anything that moves is Maya. Moving means change. Doesn't movement mean change?
Right.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It does. It means it's changed. If you got a ball here and it moves over here, it's changed. The ball might not have changed, but it's moved. It's changed location. There's change. Yeah. Now, if you think of that ball, it's made up of atoms and molecules and particles. All those particles are changing. So the ball itself is actually changing. If we go into the level of physics and particles. But even if anything that's moving is Maya, anything that's changing is Maya. Movement is karma. Again, you won't see this in the scriptures usually. Can karma lead to liberation? The answer is no. Karma is Maya. Now, ultimately speaking, nothing in Maya can lead to liberation. But not directly, but indirectly through the teaching, which is part of Maya, we all discover the truth, because the truth is all that exists. Any other qualities of subject and object? I mean, we could create a table, couldn't we? And we could have one column subject and another column object. And then we could have every row would have a heading. Yeah. So, or you might not need to have a heading. You know, one of them could be stillness and movement. Karma and akarma. Akarma means no karma. Yeah. Then you can have changing, unchanging. Yeah. Which is basically what Karen said. Karen said infinite, meaning always here and changing. So you can have, maybe you can have one ever present and temporary. You see? And you could populate a table, couldn't you? What else would we have? What other rows would we add to our table? Karen's described infinite in terms of time. What often goes with time? Time and space. So finite, what finite means? Can anyone define what finite means? Finite is the opposite of infinite. What does finite mean, Ray?
Well, somewhere along the line, there's a name and form, isn't it? Whereas a finite thing has got a name and a form.
It does.
Mm.
Yes. Name and form refers to Maya. Nama is name, Rupa is form. Nama Rupa refers collectively to Maya. So we could say on our table, we could say the self or the subject is formless, whereas Maya has form. The subject is nameless, whereas the object has name. Did I say it? Did I say that right last time? Subject is formless. The object has form. Yes, or Maya has form. Right. The subject is nameless. Objects have names. All right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't tell me what. That's not a definition of finite, even though that's correct.
Birth and death.
Birth and death, that's another column. Another row, I mean, that's another row. We could have the subject is deathless and birthless, but the objects are born, which means they're created, and they die. That means they disappear. Whereas a subject is unborn, undying, not subject to birth or death, never created, never can be destroyed. It's another one. Subject cannot be destroyed, objects can be destroyed, which means death, right? But no one's just giving me a definition of finite. Gordon.
Limited in both time and space.
Limited in both time and space. We don't have finite means it's limited. That's what finite means. Yeah, we don't have to specify how. It could be finite in terms of time. It could be finite in terms of space. Yeah. But finite means it is limited. Yeah. That's right. Sorry, Gordon.
I think they go together. You can't have one without the other.
True. You can't. You can't actually. They do go together. That's quite right. There's only one thing that's infinite. And it's infinite both in terms of time and terms of space. But if we want to define what finite means, it means limited. What does limited mean?
As a beginning and an end.
That's right, exactly. It has a beginning, it has an end. That's what finite means. It has limits. It has a beginning and an end. Either in terms of space, yeah, it means it starts here and it ends here. You know, my hand is finite, but it goes from here to here. It has a beginning. Maybe you could say the beginning's here and the end's here. Or you could say the beginning's here, the end's here, wherever you want to, but it doesn't matter. It's finite. It has a beginning and an end. It's limited. What does limited mean? It means it has limits, isn't it? Limited means it has limits. Limits means beginning and end, as Jimmy just said. Very important just to understand exactly what these words means in a very simple way that a 5-year-old can understand or a 10-year-old can understand, you know. 5-year-old can understand what a beginning and an end is. That's a limit. If something has limits, then that's finite. If it starts at a particular point in time and ends at a particular point in time, that's limited in terms of time. So I might say something or make a sound. Ah. That sound started at a particular point in time and it ended at a particular point in time. Thankfully for you. did end. So that's finite. And infinite means it has no beginning, no end, no limits. So another word for infinite is limitless. In Sanskrit, who knows what the word Vedanta means? Who knows what the word Vedanta means, literally? Gordon.
No. Please pardon.
The end of the Vedas.
It does. And can you break that down for me?
Veda and
Anta.
Anta.
Yes. Vedanta means the end of the Vedas. Why is it called? And so Veda, Anta. Anta means end. Yeah. So Anta means end. And Ananta means endless. Ananta. Anta means limited. Means a limit. Ananta means unlimited. So the self is described in some of the Upanishads as being ananta, which means without end, unending, unlimited. Okay.
And without beginning as well. Sometimes
Without
it's
beginning. Yeah.
So that's always puzzled me, actually.
Ajata. Ajata. Have you heard of Ajata? Jata means birth or creation. Beginning. Ajata means no birth, no creation. Now, with reference to Maya, it means Maya never came into existence. But it's also a description of the self as being birthless. I'll give you some other rows on our table. The self is one. The subject is the self. And the objects are Maya. The self or the subject is one. Isn't it? How many of you are there? There's one of you. Objects are seemingly many. Tables, chairs, cars, clouds, people, emotions, thoughts, feelings, lots of different things going on. Subject is one. We say subject, we never say subjects. We say subject, singular, and objects, plural. Bhagavan never goes into this. Do you know what he says often instead? He says, this is a great way of testing if something's an object, or if you're not sure if something's an object or not. Bhagavan doesn't bother explain any of what I've explained. He often asks this. He says, suddenly in the middle of a conversation with someone, they'll say, oh, I had this experience. I had this experience. There were some bright lights. I felt like I'd expanded to the size of the universe. I heard the word Om being chanted in my head or something like that. Whatever, they'll come up with something, and he'll say, was that present in deep sleep? Have you heard him say this before? If you read talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, you'll see this all the time, littered throughout the text. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he'll say, was that present in deep sleep? Why does he say that?
The self is always present, and that's the time that we don't perceive objects.
Yeah. How does that question help us discern objects from subject?
Well, if it's the time that you don't perceive objects, then there's just the subject.
Yeah. So say I came to you, Jimmy, and I said, I had this amazing meditation experience. It was like this, it was like that. It had this quality, that quality. And then you said to me, is it there in deep sleep? So I had this amazing experience. I saw, you know, a vision of this deity, and I heard this amazing sound, and there was this bright light. And you say, well, was that there? Is that there in deep sleep? Why might you say that?
Because you're pointing out that the experience that we think is the self is actually an object.
Exactly. That's it. Can everyone see that? Does everyone understand that? Does anyone not understand that? Hands up if you understand that. What do you think, Worrell? Are you there?
I'm not sure, Tom, if I'm here or not. I don't have an answer to that at the moment. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I want deep sleep is a state in which there are no objects at all. But does the self or the subject, does that exist in deep sleep?
I would say yes.
It must.
But,
it must, because. Oh, sorry, Worrell. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean, it's just that. Yeah, but there's no experiences or anything. It's you know, the self is there, but the world and everything else has disappeared, vanished. So there's no, weirdly, there's no recollection of that. It's just nothingness, which is everythingness. But we can't get our head around it in the current state, maybe.
So experience means experience of objects. So in our table, all experiences are objects. All experiences are objects. They fulfill our definition, don't they? They're perceived. You do perceive your experiences. That's how, if you didn't perceive your experiences, you wouldn't have any experiences, because perception and experience are the same thing. Yeah. And experiences rise in your consciousness. They appear in your consciousness. Anything that appears in your consciousness is an object. In deep sleep, there are no objects. So anything that's an object, it won't be there in deep sleep. The only thing that's there in deep sleep is the subject, the self. As you said, Worrell, without a body, without the mind, without any appearance of the world, it's just the self. The self must be there in deep sleep because it's always present. Doesn't come and go. If the self disappeared in deep sleep, then it wouldn't be eternal, infinite, unborn, undying. It'd be born every time you wake up, and it would die every time you entered into deep sleep, wouldn't it? Self must be there all the time because it's the ever-present, unchanging self. In the self, there is no action, no movement. Movement is only in Maya. So, Bhagavan, he suddenly said to people, say, well, look, did I have an experience of the self? I had this experience. And he goes, well, was that experience there in deep sleep? They would say no. So then that means that's not the self. That means that's Maya.